After doing an online or disconnected installation of your SUSE Manager 4 server, you still have some more configuration work you must perform prior to being able to use your SUME 4 server in the management of any client servers. This module will take you step by step through this configuration process. During this module, I want to accomplish the following 3 objectives. First, I want to cover why you need to go through this SUME setup process and what you'll be configuring. Second, you'll learn how to perform each step of this SUME setup process. And then third, you'll see how to get your patch and update content from the SEC and the tools that you can use to monitor this synchronization process. We'll start this module by introducing the type of configuration work you'll be doing to complete your SUME setup. And we'll also discuss the tools you'll be using to do this SUME setup. After the installation of your SUME 4 server, you must complete a SUME setup procedure prior to being able to sync any patch and update content from the SCC down to your SUME 4 server. This SUME setup procedure is really a 2-stage process involving the use of 2 different tools. The purpose of the initial configuration, which is the first stage, is to create the SUME server certificate and to configure database user credentials for SUME's embedded PostgreSQL database. Creating the SUME server certificate is vital for allowing any SUME proxy servers to be able to communicate with the SUME server and for managed clients to be able to communicate with the SUME server. The second configuration stage is known as the SUME administrative configuration. Here you will create the organization that will contain all the SUME managed resources and information and create your first administrative user that can manage those resources and information. The initial configuration stage will be completed from the command line of your SUME 4 server if your SUME server was installed in text mode. In other words, what was called Run Level 3. If you installed your SUME server in graphical mode, Run Level 5, then you can use either the GUI-based YAST interface or use the YAST2 command line interface. Regardless of whether your SUME server was installed in text or graphical mode, you'll bring up a browser and complete the administrative configuration stage from within the SUME web UI. This next objective covers the initial configuration setup stage 1 step at a time. Since this configuration stage can be configured either in a command line or a GUI environment, depending on how you installed your SUME 4 server, screenshots for both the command line and the GUI environment will be shown side by side on a slide. Regardless of whether you're using YAST2 from the command line or YAST from the GUI, you'll see that at each step in this process, you'll be required to provide the exact same information. Just how you navigate from field to field within a screen and from screen to screen will change based on whether you're in a GUI or a command line environment. Here you see the opening screens in both the YAST2 command line mode on the left and the YAST GUI mode on the right. In either case, as you can see here, you'll select the option that says Set up SUSE Manager from scratch. This next screen in the initial configuration process is where you specify the email address to which you want your SUME server to send notifications. This screen is where you configure the SUME server's certificate. Take special note of the SSL password you use here, as this password must be specified when you install any SUME proxy server that will communicate with this SUME 4 server. After specifying the configuration information needed for the SUME server certificate, you will be asked to specify credentials for a user that SUME will use to access its embedded PostgreSQL database. Next, the initial configuration process will ask your permission to run a setup script named SMGR211. This script does much of the work by creating SUME-related objects whose configuration information you specified on previous screens. The MGR setup script will create and then store the SUME server certificate. It will store information into the PostgreSQL database. It configures multiple under-the-covers services such as Tomcat, Jabber, and Cobbler, and then at last it will start Spacewalk and SALT-related services. This final screen of the initial configuration process will display the URL that you will use in a browser for the next stage of the SUMA setup process, which is the administrative configuration. This next stage will be completed using the SUMA Web UI. You will now complete the administrative configuration using the URL provided at the final screen displayed during the initial configuration stage. This indicates that the DNS name specified in this URL must be resolved either by a DNS server or via the local host file. Your two main tasks during the administrative configuration are to create at least one organization within your SUMA system. You can implement multiple organizations, however, most of our SUMA customers have a single organization defined. And secondly, you must create at least one SUMA administrative user. An organization is the unit of administrative management within the SUMA system for a given company or department, and the organization contains all the SUMA configuration items and collected information on the managed devices owned by the organization. Even though most of our customers have a single organization, we do have some customers whose SUMA systems have multiple organizations defined. They might have done this because different support staffs manage the client servers, or each organization represents a separate, distinct geography or division within the company. The first administrative type user you create during the administrative configuration stage has the SUSE Manager administrative privileges that make this user the super user of the entire SUMA system. This administrative user can then in turn be used to create other users. These users may have a subset of the privileges that were granted to the SUSE Manager administrator. This capability provides large organizations with the flexibility to grant authority and permissions in order to distribute the administrative and management workload. The screenshot shown here is the screen used to provide the information needed in the administrative configuration stage. The administrator brings up a browser and enters the URL provided on the last screen shown during the initial configuration. The administrator's browser is then redirected to this Create Organization screen shown here in the Web UI in this screenshot. Once values have been provided for all the fields shown here, clicking the Create Organization button will create the organization and then create the SUMA administrator login credentials. These are the credentials that the SUMA administrator will provide to the authentication page of the Web UI next time they bring up the Web UI. After clicking the Create Organization button shown on the previous screen, the administrator will see this screen displayed here in this screenshot. You'll see that your organization, and in this example, the organization was called NetSys, N-E-T-S-Y-S, was created successfully, and you'll also see a link below that message for the Setup Wizard. The Setup Wizard allows you to specify the content from the SCC you wish to sync down to your SUMA server. This is the topic we'll discuss next. The goals for the last objective of this module are to understand what information you need from the SUSE Customer Center that must be input via the Setup Wizard of the Web UI, to know where you can find this required information in your SCC account, and to learn how to use the Setup Wizard to designate that channel content you want synced down to your SUMA server, and lastly, to understand how you can monitor the channel synchronization process. Your company will have purchased some number of software entitlements from SUSE in order to obtain support and service pack updates for your various products. These software entitlements control which channels and their associated repository content your organization's SUMA server will be able to download from the SCC. If you are not familiar with the terms channel and repository, let me define them this way. A channel is the metadata that describes the content you want to sync down to your SUMA server. This metadata describes the actual patch and update files that ultimately get downloaded to your SUMA server. The channels are the means by which the packages are accessed from the repository. And a repository is a directory or directories that contain the actual patch and update content described by the owning channel's metadata. Now, these definitions and the relationship between a channel and repository hold true whether you are talking about your SUMA server accessing content from the SCC, or if you're talking about some number of managed clients accessing patch and update content from your SUMA server. The credentials you use to access the information about your organization's entitlements as shown in the SCC are the credentials you provide to your SUMA server via the setup wizard of the web UI. It's these credentials that dictate what content could potentially be synced down to your SUMA server. You can access the SCC using the URL shown on this slide. Once you authenticate using your organization's username and password, you can see what entitlements your organization has, and therefore, what SCC channels and repositories can be accessed by your SUMA server. If your organization does not yet have an SCC account, you can create one from this screen by clicking the Create an Account button. Once you have authenticated to the SCC, you will be presented with a screen similar to that shown on this slide. It is not uncommon for SUSE customers to have more than one organization. In this example, you can see that there are 4 distinct organization numbers shown in the format UC followed by 4 or 5 digits under My Organizations in the left navigation pane. Clicking the organization link at the top of this page to the right of the dashboard link will get you to a screen where you can see all your organization's usernames and passwords. Once on the organization screen in the SCC, clicking the Organization Credentials tab will allow you to see your organization's primary SCC credentials. This username and password is what you would enter into the setup wizard of SUMA's web UI. Now that you know how to obtain the SCC credentials you'll need for the setup wizard, we'll see where your SCC credentials will be used in the setup wizard. From the navigation pane in the web UI, expand Admin and then click Setup Wizard to see the opening Setup Wizard screen shown on this slide. There are 3 possible configuration steps that may be completed within the setup wizard. Each step has its own tab moving from the left to the right. You have HTTP proxy, organization credentials, and SUSE products. Clicking each tab in succession or clicking the Next button in the lower left of this screen will advance you from tab to tab. The HTTP proxy tab would be used to define the information required to have your SUSE Manager server access the outside world via an HTTP proxy server. This is the only optional tab within the setup wizard. On the Organization Credentials tab is where you will enter your SCC credentials, and if your organization has multiple sets of credentials, where you would designate your primary credential set. The final configuration in the setup wizard is on the SUSE Products tab. This is where you can see what entitlements are owned by your company and therefore what associated channel content can be downloaded to your SUMA server. The Organization Credentials tab will show a green check if the SCC credentials you entered here have been verified by the SCC. This screen can be used anytime to show you all the subscriptions and entitlements associated with your primary credential set and allows you to change the SCC username and password to a different set of credentials. Once your SCC credentials have been entered into the Organization Credentials tab and verified by the SCC, you can use the SUSE Products tab to see which updates and patches are available for synchronization to your SUMA server. Once the available products have been populated on the SUSE Products tab, and this could take 2 to 4 minutes to populate this information from the SCC, you can begin selecting those channels and subchannels whose content you will sync down to your SUMA server. There is a set of navigation buttons for the SUSE Products tab on the bottom right of the screen. Potentially, you'll need these buttons to see all the subscriptions and entitlements available based on your SCC credentials. Check the box for any parent channels whose content you want to sync down, and be sure to expand those channels to see if you need to check the box for any recommended sub-channels. When you click the Add Products button in the upper right corner of this screen, the SUME server will schedule the synchronization of all the selected channels and sub-channels. Be aware that you could be syncing down several tens of gigabytes of data or more to your SUME server, and therefore the sync process could take several hours to complete. Next, we'll look at the question of determining the progress of this synchronization process. Once a channel or sub-channel has either completed the sync process or experienced some error, a message to that effect is written to the SUME server's notification log. This notification log can be accessed in the web UI by clicking the bell icon in the upper right of the web UI, or by clicking Home followed by Notification Messages in the navigation pane on the left. These messages are not written until the sync process has either completed or had an error. So these notification messages are not real-time reports of how the sync process is going. This log is best suited to viewing the sync status of each channel the morning after the sync process has run. By default, the sync process will begin off hours at midnight. You can view a high-level status of the synchronization of each channel and sub-channel from the SUSE Products tab within the Setup Wizard. In this example, you see a parent channel which has been synced completely, as shown by the 100% progress bar, and is 50% complete in its child channel. You can also schedule a sync for any channel or sub-channel at any time from this screen. If you click the green curved arrow icon to the far right of a channel or sub-channel, you'll schedule that channel for immediate synchronization. The best way to get real-time feedback about what is going on regarding the synchronization of a given channel or sub-channel is to view that channel's log file. Each channel has a log file that is written in real time and is located in the /var/log/rhn/repo-sync directory on your SUME server. The file name within this directory is the name of the channel itself, .log. This log file will display the exact command run by the SUME server to begin the synchronization process for that given channel, as well as displaying the URL of the SCC repository that contains that particular channel's content. You will also see what RPM packages are being downloaded from the SCC to your SUME server, as well as the SUME server updating the metadata for those packages in the SUME server's embedded PostgreSQL database. Now that you have successfully completed an initial synchronization of channel content from the SCC, you're ready to complete the task shown on this slide in order to move forward toward fully managing your organization's physical and virtual servers with SUSE Manager.